Taiwan's richest man in 2018, with a net worth estimated to be $7.4 billion US.
The most powerful company in tech isn't Apple, it isn't Google, it isn't Nvidia. Most people have never heard of it. It's a Taiwanese company called Foxconn. And there's a very good chance it built the device you're looking at right now, the iPhone, the PlayStation, the laptop, the Kindle. If it has a screen and a chip, Foxconn probably had a hand in making it. At its peak, this one company employed over 1.2 million people. They didn't just build factories, they built entire cities to house their workers. And they became so essential to Apple that when the original iPhone had a last-minute crisis, the founder personally flew to the factory and set up a brand new production line. Overnight. The story of how that happened starts in 1974, in a tiny rented shed in a Taipei suburb, with a $7,500 loan and 10 elderly employees making plastic parts for TVs. But here's the twist right now. That empire is in the middle of a massive, strategic escape. And where it lands is going to determine what your next phone looks like, where it comes from, and how much it costs. This is the story of Foxconn, and it's wilder than most people realize. The story of Foxconn is really the story of one man, Terry Gou. And to understand who he became, you have to understand where he started, because it wasn't just humble. It was genuinely difficult. Gou was born in 1,950 inches, Bangqiao, Taiwan. His parents weren't originally from Taiwan, they were part of the roughly 2 million mainland Chinese who fled to the island in 1949 after losing the Chinese Civil War. His father was a police officer from Shanxi province. When the family first arrived, there was no police housing yet. So for the first 9 years of Gou's life, the family of 6 lived in the east wing of a local temple, a space normally meant for pilgrims. 6 people, a policeman's salary, a temple floor. That background displacement, scarcity, having no safety net, never left him. Later in life, he would famously say he preferred to hire people with no way out, because he believed hunger created the most loyal and hardest working employees. He wasn't being cruel. He was describing himself. To get through college, a non-prestigious maritime school, not exactly an elite institution, Gou worked nights and weekends in rubber factories, grinding wheel plants, and pharmaceutical labs. His schoolmates nicknamed him Pot Lid, a pun on his name, but also a nod to his knack for clever, sometimes inflammatory ideas. After college, he served in the Republic of China Air Force as an anti-aircraft artillery officer, stationed on the island of Kinmen, a post that, at the time, meant being on the front line of a potential Chinese military invasion. Real stakes. Not a desk job. He was discharged in 1973. 1 year later, at 24, he started a company. He borrowed $7,500 from his mother, rented a shed in a Taipei suburb, hired 10 elderly workers, and started making plastic parts for television sets. That was 1,974. No connections, no investors, no prestigious degree. Just a guy who grew up in a temple and wasn't going back. By 1980, his company, then called Honhai Precision Industry, landed its first real break. A contract to make joystick connectors for the Atari 2600. Small deal, but it opened a door. Gou took every dollar of profit and poured it back into R&D, mastering the kind of intricate connector manufacturing that the PC revolution was going to desperately need. Then he went to America. Not a trade show, not a conference. And one-month road trip across 32 states, going door to door to tech companies, pitching himself. He got thrown out by security, more than once. He kept coming back. Eventually he landed deals with IBM and Intel, opened a US branch in 1985, and took the company public in Taiwan in 1991. But his real masterstroke came in 1988, when he opened his first factory in Shenzhen, China. This was before China was the world's workshop. Gou saw it, before most people did, a massive, disciplined, low-cost labor force that could be scaled in ways that nowhere else on Earth could match. That bet didn't just pay off. It changed the entire global economy. What Foxconn built in China wasn't a factory, it was a kingdom. Their main campus in Shenzhen became known as Foxconn City, and that wasn't a metaphor. We're talking dormitories, cafeterias, hospitals, banks, basketball courts, hundreds of thousands of workers living and working in the same place. Gou was so obsessed with controlling every variable that he raised chickens on site to supply the cafeterias. This level of vertical integration gave Foxconn something nobody else had, the ability to move at a speed that was almost impossible to believe. Here's the story that captures it best. When Apple was finalizing the original iPhone, they had a crisis. The plastic screens were getting scratched too easily. They needed to switch to glass, last minute. Gou reportedly flew to the factory himself, set up an entirely new glass screen production line overnight, and personally oversaw the process. That's the thing Apple was paying for, not just assembly. the ability to solve massive problems at impossible scale. The partnership made both companies. Apple got to focus on design, software, and marketing while Foxconn handled the complex, grinding work of actually building the products. Foxconn assembled the iPhone, the iPad, the PlayStation, the Xbox, the Amazon Kindle. By the 2010s, they were the largest private employer in China. Revenue was in the trillions of new Taiwan dollars. Terry Gou, the guy who grew up in a temple, was a billionaire. For a long time, the system seemed unbeatable. But something was building underneath all of it. The pressure to produce millions of perfect devices, fast and cheap, was enormous. And that pressure landed somewhere on the workers. For years, reports came out about grueling conditions inside Foxconn's factories. Excessive overtime, relentless production quotas. A high-pressure culture that left little room to breathe. Then came the suicides, a tragic series of worker deaths that shocked the world and threw a harsh light on what was happening inside these campuses. Apple and Foxconn launched audits, made promises, implemented changes. But the damage to the company's reputation was permanent, and then came a threat that no audit could fix. The US-China trade war in the late 2010s changed everything. Foxconn's greatest strength, its massive concentration in China, suddenly became its greatest liability. The geopolitical ground was shifting, and Foxconn was sitting right on the fault line. Then COVID hit. Factory shutdowns sent shockwaves through the entire global tech industry. The fragility of building everything in one country, depending on one supply chain, became impossible to ignore. Apple started asking hard questions. Other clients did too. By 2025, the growth story was over. The new story was about escape. Foxconn calls it the China Plus One strategy. The idea is simple. Don't abandon China, but stop depending on it entirely. Spread the risk. Two countries have become the main destinations. India first. Foxconn has pledged billions, including a reported $1.5 billion expansion, and is building out iPhone assembly at scale. New campuses, worker housing, the same factory city playbook they ran in Shenzhen, now being rebuilt near Bengaluru. The projections are serious. Some estimates say India could be assembling up to 60 million iPhones a year, particularly for the US market. That's not a side operation. That's a genuine shift in where the world's most valuable product gets made. Vietnam. Second. Foxconn has actually been in Vietnam since 2007, but the investment has accelerated dramatically now, over $3.2 billion. They're making MacBook components, Xbox consoles, and here's the part that matters most. They're trying to move up the value chain. New factories for printed circuit boards. Semiconductor production plans, with one facility targeting late 2026. That last part is significant. Foxconn has spent decades being the company that assembles things other people design. Moving into semiconductors is a different game entirely. But here's the honest caveat. Most of the raw materials feeding these new factories still come from China. True independence from the Chinese supply chain is still years away, maybe longer. This is a strategic pivot, not a clean break. Terry Gou stepped down as chairman in 2019, and left the board entirely in 2023, to run for president of Taiwan, a campaign he ultimately withdrew from. The company he built is now navigating the most complicated period in its history without him, and it's doing it from a position of real strength. In 2024, Foxconn's annual revenue hit approximately $213 billion, up from $198 billion the year before. Through the first 3 quarters of 2025 alone, cumulative revenue reached the equivalent of around $167 billion, with gross profit, operating profit, and net profit, all hitting record highs for the period. The company still employs close to 1 million people during peak manufacturing season. The name Terry Gou built is bigger than ever, even as he's no longer in the building. But Foxconn is caught between two worlds, its American clients pushing hard for supply chain diversification, and its deep Chinese infrastructure that took decades to build and can't be replaced overnight. The new factories in India and Vietnam are real, the ambition is real. But so are the challenges. What happens next matters to all of us, even if we never think about it. Because the answer to where Foxconn successfully plants its next flag determines where your next phone gets made, what it costs, and how quickly you can get it. The kid who grew up on a temple floor started a company in a shed. That shed became a city. Now they're trying to build the next city somewhere else entirely. Whether they pull it off is one of the most interesting manufacturing stories playing out in the world right now. Subscribe to Stag Research if you want to. Follow stories like this, the ones happening in the background that actually shape everything else.